All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Shane, and this video is going to be about interpreting your lab results. In particular, we're going to zone in on lipids, okay, namely LDL cholesterol, and whether or not you should be concerned about your results, okay? And considering I have no videos and no subscribers, my guess is if you found this video, you're probably deep down in the rabbit hole by now looking for answers and to your questions and really haven't had any luck. So I think YouTube is an incredible resource. I didn't know a single thing about cars before YouTube, and now I pretty much do everything myself because of people offering their expertise for free. And so hopefully today I can do the same thing with my medical background. I have a bachelor's in biomedical science. I have a doctorate in pharmacy, and then I did another 2 years of residency and specialized in emergency medicine. And so the way that I'm going to structure this is I'm going to show you my own lab data, and then I'll go into some surface level details about lipids to help you understand what your results actually mean. And then I'll show you a few simple changes that I made that resulted in dramatic changes to my labs. And I'll show you those as well. And so I'll start by saying the information in this video will be helpful for everyone, but it really only applies to people who consider themselves healthy and were more or less surprised by their lipid numbers. And so, if you're obese, if you have heart disease, diabetes, if you don't exercise, maybe you smoke, what I'm going to discuss in this video is not really going to apply to you. And so the answer for you is more straightforward. So, diet, exercise, stop your bad habits. Okay. The stuff that you don't need me to tell you, and most certainly don't want to be lectured about as well. Okay. So let's just jump right in. All right. And so bear with me for a second while I kind of preface this discussion by talking about myself. And I promise you'll see why this information is important in a little bit. And so basically, I eat the same thing every day. Okay. I'm fortunate that I don't really get cravings. I don't really care about junk food or cookies or whatever. I eat 5 whole eggs every morning, and I meal prep about every week and have been basically eating the same thing for years. And so I eat about 5 pounds of 80% ground beef every week and a whole package of chicken thighs. Each of the meals contains a plethora of vegetables, and I eat about 1.5 avocados a day, almonds as well. I don't really eat starches or rice or bread or anything like that. And if it weren't for the tons of fruit I eat, I would honestly probably be in keto, but I do eat a ton of Greek yogurt with lots of fruit every day, multiple times a day, mostly in the form of bananas, strawberries, apples, and blueberries. Okay. Um, and that is about 90% of my diet. And the other 10% is if I eat my fiance's table scraps, which I often do, or, I do like having a diet soda sometimes at lunch or whatever it might be. Sometimes I'll get those really nice Publix chicken wings or hot honey chicken wings from the deli, and it's great. So I'm definitely not perfect and I'm not a complete robot, but I'd say that the other stuff is pretty minimal. If we look at the big picture, my overall diet is extremely consistent. Okay. My exercise is pretty much the same as well. So I weight train about 5 times a week, and I do moderate to high intensity cardio about once or twice a week. So I'm equally consistent there. I never have any issues sleeping, fortunately, and stress is always there during residency, but overall it's pretty well controlled. Um, and so for the most part, I feel pretty good all the time, and I also don't take any medications or supplements. And so the point that I'm trying to make here is I'm a pretty boring dude, but I am extremely consistent. So I'd be an easy target for any assassin. And this is going to be important for later in the video. So I just wanted to give my general lifestyle and leave that point here that I am consistent with everything I do. And so, as with any young dude, I hadn't really seen a physician in a few years or got any lab work done. And so, as with a lot of healthcare providers, I take great care of my patients while simultaneously being my own worst patient. So, a bit of a hypocrite myself. But I finally got myself to stumble into an office and get some lab orders for some lab work. And these are the results of my CMP and my CBC from January 2024, which we won't go into, but essentially everything here is perfectly normal. And then the whole point of this video, okay? So I was very surprised that my LDL was a bit high at 152. My triglycerides were great, okay? My LDL, or rather my cholesterol, HDL cholesterol was great. But we've all been taught that the LDL cholesterol, that's the bad cholesterol, right? It leads to plaque formation and heart disease, okay? Notably, my total cholesterol, I'm not worried about that. That is just a function of your triglycerides divided by 5 plus your HDL plus your LDL. And so if you add those up, you'll get that number. And so obviously because my LDL was high, so was my total cholesterol. So nothing to be concerned with that. I know the reason why that is elevated. And so anyways, I was legitimately concerned about this result. LDL is bad. They tell us that in school, and that's what gets reverberated throughout the healthcare system. And so I was kind of in denial at first, right? I live this healthy lifestyle. I feel great all the time. No issues with stress or sleep. I'm doing everything right. Could this be some kind of lab error? Maybe there's a hereditary component involved as well. And of course, in Western society, whenever something is wrong, we immediately think of going to medications to solve the problem. And I'm thinking, oh my God, do I need a statin? Um, am I predisposed to atherosclerosis, plaque, and heart disease? All these thoughts are running through my mind. And so this is why I don't bother going into a doctor's office. So I got a message from them saying, good afternoon. Your cholesterol is elevated. Please watch fatty foods and eat a plant-based diet. That was all I got for a couple $100. And so obviously that message doesn't even apply to me. And so with a medical background, fortunately, I'm very, very strong in literature review and interpreting data, and that allows me to come to my own conclusions. And so this is going to be the more educational part of the video. So I tried my best to uh, make this very digestible. So you could talk for hours on just one of these topics. But I wanted to discuss all these points with you before showing you my additional lab results and the significant changes I made, because it'll make a lot more sense that way. So we'll discuss LDL cholesterol versus LDL particle count. We'll discuss the importance of particle size and apolipoprotein B. And then we'll also touch on insulin sensitivity in HDL and triglycerides as a marker of metabolic health, and how we must take this into consideration when interpreting our LDL results. And I won't go into detail on the lean mass hyperresponder hypothesis, but just know this is an emerging area of research, and it focuses particularly on people who are on a ketogenic diet, who have very high LDL, very high HDL, and very low triglycerides, as well as a low body mass index. And there's some data showing that the high LDL in these patients is some sort of metabolic reaction, and it may be cardioprotective in this particular subset of people. And so if the story that I've told you so far is comparable to your own situation, and even if not, I highly recommend getting your own NMR-LipoProfile test. I found this through a website called Merrick Health. I have no affiliation with them, so you can purchase your own labs. And personally, this was a game changer for me, because typically you'd have to go see a physician or a PA, have them order labs, and it's a whole process, and pay a copay and all that. But this website made it insanely easy, and I literally just buy whatever I want on their website and then go to any lab corp. Okay. I found a promo code that you can use here, Power Project 10, and it'll give you a discount. Again, I'm just giving this information to you. I have no affiliation, but their service has been great every time I've used them. And so I highly recommend purchasing the NMR LipoProfile test to get a much more detailed picture of what your lipid panel results mean, as well as an ApoB test. Okay, and it's $14 on the website. And so now I'll get into why the NMR test is so great and how you can understand the nuances of the results that you'll get as well. And so first, it's important to understand the difference between LDL cholesterol or LDL-C, which is the result you'll get on any standard lipid panel in the United States, and LDL particle count or LDL-P. So LDL cholesterol measures the amount of cholesterol that's held inside any given LDL particle, as displayed here. While LDL-P measures the actual number of LDL particles. And so even though LDL-P is superior and the more accurate test, the reason why LDL-P isn't commonly tested is because LDL-C generally provides a good estimate of LDL-P. But many times, LDL-C does not actually provide enough information for you to see the whole picture. And so as you can see here, the tan circles represent cholesterol, while the purple circles are your actual LDL particles. And so there's very, as you can see, there's a very small amount of cholesterol within each particle, okay? So in this example, there's only 2 molecules of cholesterol per particle. And so this person's labs would show a very low LDL cholesterol, but look at the amount of actual LDL particles that they have. There's a lot here. And so their LDL-P would be very high. And this is an example of discordance between LDL cholesterol and LDL particle count. And so this person here, they would have a very low LDL-C. And so we may falsely assume that they have a low cardiovascular risk. Um, when in reality, if they have an LDL-P, the answer is not so clear, and actually their cardiovascular risk would probably be much higher. In this example, we have the opposite situation where this person has very high LDL cholesterol. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 8 particles of cholesterol, but they have a very low particle count. And so this patient's provider might freak out over their high cholesterol and maybe start them on a statin, when in reality, they have a very low LDL-P. And so at a baseline, their cardiovascular risk is actually very low to begin with. And so they may not even need a statin at that point. And so these 2 points here summarize what we just went over. So the LDL particle count is the main contributor to plaque development, and it's the more accurate marker for cardiovascular risk. And because LDL-P and LDL-C can be discordant with one another, LDL-C is a good starting point, but it can certainly be misleading. And so now my question for you is by taking a look at the diagram here, with your LDL cholesterol being the same in both scenarios, would you rather have option A, which we call large pattern, or option B, which we call small pattern? I'll give you a minute to think about that. And so hopefully you chose large pattern. So LDL cholesterol being equal, ideally that's what you would want. And the thought process is as follows. So look at this diagram here. Think of your vessels as a sidewalk. Okay, a fresh new sidewalk has very few cracks. Over time, you have environmental like stress fractures that can happen, various environmental factors that can cause the concrete to form small cracks and indents. And this is the equivalent to inflammation within your vasculature causing these little cracks in the lining of your endothelium. Okay, and so the idea is that small LDL particles are more likely, as you can see here, to fall into these cracks within your arteries and initiate plaque formation. So hopefully you picked pattern A. Now kind of let's shift away from LDL for a second and discuss apolipoprotein B, or ApoB for short. No, so ApoB is a protein that is simply a structural component of an LDL particle. And what that means is we have one ApoB per LDL particle. And so as a result, by measuring ApoB, we can get a pretty clear picture of our LDL particle count. And again, this is this is another measurement that does appear to be a better assessment of cardiovascular risk than your LDL cholesterol. And so we just had a pretty lengthy discussion on lipids, but I feel that's really only half the equation. And so the only reason that we care about lipids is because we think they are a contributor to plaque formation. But the truth is, how can we have plaque formation if our vasculature, okay, if our internal sidewalk is freshly paved without any cracks? The answer is it's going to depend a lot more on. It's going to be a lot more difficult to form plaques if we don't have systemic inflammation to wreak havoc on our endothelium. And so, a massive contributor to systemic inflammation is our blood glucose and our underlying insulin sensitivity. And this is why people with diabetes, who by definition are insulin resistant, are massively and chronically inflamed. Their bodies are just getting ripped apart on a daily basis. It's chronic, and it increases the risk of just about every other disease out there. And on the opposite end of that spectrum, if you're insulin sensitive, you require very little insulin to control your blood glucose, which must be maintained in a pretty tight range. It's usually about 70 to 100 milligrams per deciliter is where we like to see it. And so if you are insulin resistant, you will have persistent hyperglycemia or elevated blood glucose. And this leads to oxidative stress, inflammation, endothelial dysfunction. And these are all individual risk factors for atherogenesis and cardiovascular disease. Insulin resistance also interrupts lipid and fatty acid metabolism. And so, as you can imagine, if you're inhibiting lipolysis, you're going to have more fat, more triglycerides in the blood, and that can lead to more atherogenesis and cardiovascular disease. Lastly, insulin plays a very important role in just general endothelial and vascular health to help maintain arterial patency and nitric oxide production, which keeps those vessels nice and open. And so, insulin resistance is going to impair this. And again, leads to reduced vascular permeability, endothelial dysfunction, and eventually that leads to cardiovascular dysfunction as well and plaque formation. And so one of the two, or rather one of the major markers of insulin resistance and poor metabolic health is a low HDL in combination with high triglycerides. And so like I said in the beginning of the video, if this is you, then you need to fix that with diet and exercise. Okay, this video is really addressing people with isolated elevated LDL. And so after I learned about my elevated LDL cholesterol, I got an NMR test done. And as you can see here, my LDL particle count was quite high at 1800. And as confirmed by my previous labs, my LDL cholesterol was also really high at 180. And so that was even higher than in the first test a few days earlier, which was 152. But again, this confirmed that my HDL was 66, my triglycerides were low at 80. And so in that sense, I have elevated LDL, but I'm also very insulin sensitive. And so in combination with my normal fasting blood glucose and my normal A1C, we can infer that I have a pretty low systemic inflammation. And here we can see, as we discussed earlier, I have those nice fluffy LDL particles. And so even though I have a lot of them, okay, they're not small and hopefully not slipping into those cracks, so to speak. Additionally, large LDL particles, those fluffy particles, are associated with insulin sensitivity as well. And then finally, the cherry on top here, the NMR test does come with this nice calculation that they've come up with all the results of the NMR, and then they give you a score, and they say that I'm very insulin sensitive with a score of less than 25. So they didn't even give me an exact score. It was that low. I also got my ApoB checked, and because there's one, like I said, there's one ApoB per LDL particle. And because my LDL particle count was very high, as expected, my ApoB was high as well at 117. And so what can I interpret from my January 2024 NMR results? One, I've got a very high amount of large LDL particles, and that's better than having a high amount of small LDL particles, but still, in the grand scheme of things, this may not be ideal considering a high LDL particle count in general is associated with cardiovascular disease. Two, as expected, my ApoB was high. And then three, I have all the markers of insulin sensitivity, which is a very good thing. And so even with my results showing that I'm insulin sensitive and metabolically healthy with low inflammation, I still think it would be a good idea to try and get these numbers down a bit. And so now going back to my lifestyle, I'm pretty consistent with everything. And so I make a pretty good N of one controlled experiment, right? And so my plan was to make some dietary changes targeting saturated fat reduction and then reassess in 3 months. And so this is literally the only changes that I made, guys. So I went from 5 whole eggs a day to 1 whole egg plus 8 whites. And then I went from 5 pounds of 80% ground beef, reduced that down to 3.25 pounds of 96% ground beef. And then I added 2 pounds of salmon in replacement of that. I kept everything else the same. And so just doing some sticky note math, that's about a 50 to 60% reduction in saturated fat and about an 80% reduction in dietary cholesterol. And so I did that for 3 months, and then fast forward 3 months from January to April of 2024. And we can see here from those two changes, I made phenomenal improvement. I decreased my LDL particle count from 1,800 to 1,000, okay, down 41%, which is massive. My LDL cholesterol went from 180 to freaking 85. Okay, so I dropped my LDL over 50% by changing literally two things in my diet. And my HDL and my triglycerides are still looking pretty good. LDL particle size still looks good. So we've got those nice fluffy particles, just a lot less of them. And my LPIR score did go up a little bit. It's I'm still in the 35th percentile and looking good, but I'll just continue monitoring that for now. And then probably not a surprise because my LDL particle count went down so much. But I'm very happy to report that my ApoB went down 50% just like my LDL cholesterol. I also got some additional biomarkers tested on this go around. So I tested my erythrocyte sedimentation rate or ESR. So that was great. I checked my CRP or my C-reactive protein. That looked good. And then my uric acid was normal as well. And then finally, my fasting insulin is very low at 3.2. So again, a great sign of insulin sensitivity, and I absolutely recommend that you get some of these tests done. And so, what do I want you to take away from this video? One, your LDL is a component of atherogenesis, okay, but it's just one component. You need to assess and think about your lipids in the context of inflammation, and that can be done by addressing your insulin sensitivity, your ESR, your CRP, uric acid, okay, among other things. Two, your LDL-P and your ApoB are more valuable than LDL-C in terms of assessing your cardiovascular risk. And then lastly, I showed you a real world example of the insane power of diet in terms of reducing your lipid profile and thus your cardiovascular risk. And so don't go straight to a statin, okay? They are highly effective, but as with anything, there is a cost. These are not completely innocent drugs. A lot of them cause muscle pains. A lot of them, they all can increase your risk of diabetes. We talked about how bad that was. And with the exception of antibiotics, really no medication out there is a treatment, okay? By using a statin, you're just putting your but you're basically putting a band-aid on the problem. So take control of your health and diet with diet and exercise. Okay, medications will largely not do the trick for you. All right. Well, so hopefully that was informative. Yeah. See you later.